Now, I remember Valentine's Day when I was in high school. In the weeks leading up to the day, we could order carnations from the prefects, and the prefects would bring them down to the assembly on the day, and they would hand out these carnations. And it would be one of the worst things to happen to not receive even one carnation on that day. But I knew I would always get at least one carnation because I would secretly buy one for myself and send it to myself anonymously. So Brother Russ is not the only smart one. So the world is celebrating Valentine's Day. So let's discuss what Valentine's Day is about. You may be surprised it has very little to do with red hearts or chocolate candy. Valentine was a Christian who was actually beheaded in AD 270 for his faith. Now, apart from this, that the fact that he was beheaded, there's very little information about him, except we have some legends. One legend was that he helped Christians in prison get married. This is maybe why he's linked to love. Another legend is that he performed a miracle on the daughter of the person who jailed him. And then he sent a card to her before he was beheaded. So she received a Valentine's card. Well, these are legends, but one thing we do know is that he was jailed and he was beheaded because he was preaching the gospel. In other words, the real truth about Valentine's Day is that it's a day of love towards God. Now, through Valentine, we can understand the core meaning of love. Love is actually about sacrifice. You see, Valentine was willing to sacrifice his freedom for the love of Christ. And if the legends are true, he was willing to sacrifice his freedom to help imprisoned Christians get married. And he sacrificed his pride to help the daughter of his enemy. Now, all this lines up with what love is really about. Love is about sacrifice. Love is about doing good for others, whether they deserve it or not. Love is about doing the right thing, whether you feel like it or not. And for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. We see that it's about sacrifice. Sacrifice says, I will put my needs below yours, and I'll do what is right, even when I don't feel like it. Let me share a different kind of love story here. These are my grandparents, and the story goes back to World War II. This was in the 1940s, and all over the world, young people wanted to do their part in the war effort. Now, we all know that war is terrible. People do terrible things during war. But you know, war also brings out some of the best in people. Because of war, people are often united against a common enemy. Through war, people are often happy to sacrifice for each other for the greatest good. And I think the church as well, we need to understand that we are always at war against the devil. We are at war. So therefore, we put aside petty differences and we are united as a church, united for God against Satan. We are Christian soldiers. Well, my grandparents were a young married couple when they joined the army. My grandmother, she was a telegraph officer. And my opa, that's my grandfather, he was a tank commander. But for some reason, they would not deploy him. He was stuck with his 9-to-5 job. Why? The reason soon became clear. My grandmother was a telegraph officer and she had a higher rank than him. And she was working for top generals with top secret information. And They did not want my grandmother to be emotionally compromised, worrying about my grandfather on some European battlefield. So they decided that he would stay in South Africa on base, and she had to be focused on her job. Now, my grandfather did not like that. He felt pretty cheated, but he wanted to do his part for the war effort. And he realized maybe this was his sacrifice. He would not go off to war. He'd stay at home. Maybe this was his sacrifice. Now, it wasn't all terrible. They had some fun. For example, here's a funny story. My grandfather was once arrested on base. Why? Because he walked past my grandmother, his wife, on base, and he slapped her on the backside. He was immediately arrested by the military police for assaulting a superior officer. But then one day, something very surprising happened. He received orders to ship out. He would be trained in the Egyptian desert, and then he'd join a tank column to fight through Italy and fight over the Alps into Germany against the Nazis. And off he went, and he fought in Europe, and my grandmother served at home. After the war, they returned and they built a family. Over 50 years passed, and then my grandmother, well, she died. And they'd just been married for 59 years. And then while my grandfather was going through her belongings, he found a secret, something that she'd done in deep sacrificial love. There amongst her belongings was a letter that my grandfather had never seen before, a letter from the senior war command during World War II. And the letter was in response to a letter my grandmother had sent. She had asked the generals to allow my grandfather to go and fight for his country. And she promised that it would not affect the quality of her work. She said he wanted to go. He wanted to do his part. He wanted to fight for our freedom. And they said that he could. And my grandfather, he had never known about this until he'd found that letter. He'd never known the great sacrifice that she had made for him. You see, that is love. Love is sacrifice. Love is doing the right thing, even when it is tough. Now, the Bible presents different kinds of love. We have eros love, which is the erotic love meant for marriage. We understand that. There's phileo love, which is friendship love. It's love for spouse, love for family, love for friends. We understand friendship love. And then we have agape love, which is the unconditional love for all people. And honestly, a lot of us do not understand that love. I mean, how can you love all people? Some years ago, Michael Jackson came to South Africa, and during a concert, he went, "I love you, I love you, I love you," to everybody in the crowd. And I thought that was pretty fake. How could he say "I love you" to all these people he didn't know? It definitely was not eros marriage, love, because we were not married to Michael Jackson. It was not phileo love, because we're not friends. He didn't know us, we didn't know him. But then I realized, what about agape love? Maybe it could, in a sense, be a kind of agape love, because agape love means doing the right thing for someone else, whether they deserve it or not. You see, if Michael Jackson continually tried to do good to every single person he met, then he'd be practicing agape love. I don't know if he was or not, but that's the definition of agape love. This is the part we don't seem to understand. Agape love does not have to have emotions involved. Agape love says, I will do the right thing because it is the right thing. It's a sacrificial love saying, I will do the right thing because it's right, regardless of my feelings. Let's look at what Jesus teaches us about agape love. Jesus says, you have heard it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemies. Now, please notice, you shall love your neighbor is in capital letters. And the reason it's in capital letters is that's a quote from the Old Testament. But the second part, hate your enemy, that's not from the Old Testament. Jesus was quoting what the scribes and Pharisees were teaching. So that was not part of God's law. Jesus goes on to explain. He says, but I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. That's tough. How do you love your enemies? How do you care for people who actually hate you? Well, verse 45, God explains how it's done. Look at verse 45. So that you may prove yourselves to be sons of your Father who is in heaven, for he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends his rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Okay, let's look at this. How does God love agape unconditionally? Does God love what liars do, what adulterers do, what murderers do, what child molesters do? Does God love what they do? No. You see, God doesn't have the deep emotional phileo friendship love with these people. So then how does God love wicked people? How does God love all people? It's agape love. Agape love means you do good to all people, whether they deserve it or not, because it's the right thing to do. That's what God does. He sends sunshine on the rain and rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. God blesses good people and bad people with agape love. And Jesus says something very interesting. He says, if we do that, he says, you may prove yourselves to be sons of your Father who is in heaven. You see, Jesus says, when we do what God does, practicing agape love for all people, we prove ourselves to be sons of our Father in heaven. And you know what that means? That's DNA. We are children of our Father. Our DNA as a church and as Christians is we are to have agape love for all people. It's like Michael Jackson shouting, I love you, I love you, I love you. People should know that we as Christians really love them. We will always do the right thing, whether we feel like it or not. We will always do it, whether people deserve it or not, because we are sons and daughters of our Father in heaven. Let's see what else Jesus says about agape love. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Even the tax collectors, do they not do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Even the Gentiles, do they not do the same? Therefore, you shall be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Sorry. This is agape love. This is our DNA. It's sacrificial love. It's doing the right thing even when you don't feel like it, because it's the right thing to do. Now, some people say, hang on a second, isn't that a little cold and robotic? Someone just doing the right thing. Like, think about a robot. I will do the right thing because it is the right thing. It is my duty. Some people say, I don't want to be treated like that, but let me tell you an interesting secret here. This is the way God's designed it, because it starts with duty. When you are kind to someone because it's duty, and you're gentle and fair and reliable and encouraging, the result is people like you And as a result, agape love changes and becomes friendship love. Agape love becomes friendship love. And that's what Jesus does. God doesn't look from heaven and think, okay, if they're good enough, then I will love them. No, that's not what God does at all. Romans 5 verse 8 says, God demonstrates his own love towards us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. You see, Jesus offered agape love. He gave his life for all people because it was the right thing to do. For God so agape the world. The gospel is for all. And please, I want you to look at this picture. This is so important. You see Jesus hanging on that cross. Please understand, that should have been you. You should have died for your own sins. You should have paid, but Jesus took your place. And when people understand that agape love, Jesus doing the right thing is for all people. When people understand that, people's hearts are cut and they are drawn closer. And when we come closer and become Christians and trust in Jesus, then we move from agape love to phileo love. We become Jesus' friends. Look at this. John 15 says, this is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that a person will lay down his life for his friends. We become his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. You see, agape love is unconditional, but phileo love is conditional, right? Phileo love comes down to trust. He says in verse 14, you are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you slaves, for the slave does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends, because all things that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you. Jesus calls us friends, and this is part of our DNA of love. We love all people unconditionally, agape. And this agape love leads to phileo love. Let's look at an example in the New Testament of phileo love among Christians. Look what Paul writes to Priscilla and Aquila, early Christians. He writes, greet Prisca and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus, who risked their own necks for my life, to whom not only do I give thanks, but also all the churches of the Gentiles. Now people say, oh, look there. It says Prisca, not Priscilla. They say, oh, there's a typo. There's an error in the Bible. The Bible's not reliable. That's not the truth, not at all. Do you know what that is? Her name is Priscilla, but Paul calls her Prisca. It's a nickname. You give nicknames often to people that you care about, people you have emotional attachments to. Priscilla and Aquila were Paul's friends. And how deep was this friendship? He says there, they risked their necks. In other words, it started with agape love and it grew to phileo love. And Davika and I, we understand this. When we first came to Surrey and we met you guys, it was, yeah, these are nice people. We'll offer agape love because it's the right thing to do. But now it's so different. Oh, now it's so different. Because as we getting to know you, we are now friends. And we're having friendships that are going to last for all eternity. And we're getting close to people, some people in this congregation already, we're willing to risk our necks for. That's the love of Christ. That's part of our DNA. And why do we love and support each other so much? We can't help it. It's in our DNA because we love because he first loved us. Now let's talk a little bit about love and Valentine's Day and marriage. I'd like to apply everything I just said and from the Bible to marriage. Marriage has all three kinds of love. The agape sacrificial love, where we just do what's right because it's the right thing to do regardless of our feelings. Then we have phileo love, friendship love. And you know, those who are not yet married, look at this. You start with agape love, loving all people unconditionally. Then as you get to know people, it moves to phileo love. As you get to know people, the relationship gets deeper. And then eventually you find someone where the phileo love is so strong that you want to get married and move up into eros love. In other words, you should marry your best friend. That's God's plan. If you look at this, this is a pyramid. Agape leads to phileo, phileo leads to eros. Just as a pyramid will not last very long if you turn it upside down, it will fall over. In the same way, you cannot change God's order of things. Agape, phileo, eros. Now let's look at this and apply by asking the question, what is love really? Now some people say love is a feeling. Some people say love is an action. Maybe love is both. What is love? Many people in this world get into trouble because they focus on the feeling. You know that song, The Way You Make Me Feel? Well, let's test that. Let's look at 1 Corinthians 13. Paul says love is patient, love is kind, it is not jealous, love does not brag, it is not arrogant. Okay, so let's look at this. Let's look at the word patience. Let's apply love, feeling, and love action to patience. Now, if love is a feeling, how can you feel if someone is patient? It's like I was sitting in a restaurant and in walked this beautiful woman and her patience washed over me like a refreshing wave on a dry seashore. That doesn't work that way, does it? No, you get to know if someone is patient by watching their actions. You see what they do to know whether or not they are patient. How about the word kindness? How do you know if someone is kind? When you first meet them, do you get the feeling of kindness? No. You see their kind actions or their unkind actions. And based on that, you conclude whether or not this person is kind. You see, it starts with actions, and actions then produce love feelings. The Bible says the same. While we were sinners, Christ died on the cross. He took the action. And what was the result? The result is feelings. When the people heard this, they were cut to the heart. Now, it's the same for marriages. Foolish people say, well, our love is dead because the feeling is gone. Well, let's look at that relationship to see what really happened. And this is what happens in many situations. Here's an example. There's a young man or an older man and he likes this woman. Okay, what does he do? He wants to get her attention. So he does the action, the love action of buying her flowers. When she sees the love action, she gets a feeling. All right. How does she respond? She smiles and she laughs at his jokes. That's action. And what do those actions do? They produce a feeling. Okay, he feels good because he sees her actions, how she responds. Now that emboldens him. So he takes the action of inviting her out for a cup of coffee. The action results in a feeling. She feels a certain way because of his attention. And then when she says yes, He feels good because of her action of saying yes. And then at the end of the time of having coffee together, she gives him a photograph of herself, action, and results in feelings. So you see what happens when people are dating. You have love action, flying backwards and forwards. And what's the result of love action? The result is love feeling. And as the love feeling and action goes back and forth, you are building phileo love, friendship love. And then they decide to get married and have wonderful eros love. But now comes the problem. Maybe a year into the marriage, he thinks, well, she's my wife. She doesn't need flowers anymore. She doesn't need to go out for coffee anymore. And he stops the love action. And because the actions stop, so do the feelings. And she stops taking care of herself. She stopped looking after her hair or whatever she did. She stopped smiling at him and laughing at his jokes. Her actions stop and the feelings die. What is the solution? It's really, really simple. Here's the solution. Simply start the love action again. When you start the love action, the feelings will follow. You see, when you focus on the agape love foundation, the rest will just follow. The phileo will follow, and within marriage, the eros will follow. That is how God has designed us. That is how it works. And you know, it's not just for marriage. I'm saying that agape and phileo love applies everywhere. Because if you give kindness, helpfulness, respect to other people, the result is friendship. And it can apply to anybody. You see, you just keep doing the right thing. And you know, it applies even to God. Because sometimes you don't feel like praying. You don't feel like singing. You don't feel like reading your Bible. You don't feel like helping other people. But you just close your eyes and you say, Father God, I don't feel like praying to you, but I will, because it's the right thing to do. And God, it's the right thing because you are so holy and you are so good and you are so kind to me that I want to honor you. And do you see what's happening? Already your heart is changing. Already you're moving back up into phileo love because you're giving God his honor and his due. So in closing, our love is DNA, and DNA is part of our church love. What does this mean practically? Let's talk to Christians first. If you are a Christian, you just do the right thing because it's the right thing. That's agape love. And the result is, this is the base of the pyramid. If you do this, everything else falls into place. And this applies to your relationship with Christians, non-Christians, friends, family, and like I said, even to God. But what if you're not a Christian? What if you've not given your life to Jesus and you're baptized into him? Right now, sadly, you are only in the agape love level. You've not moved up into the friendship level. And the reason is simple. Jesus died on the cross for you. And by not coming to Christ, you have actually rejected Jesus. You said, Jesus, your sacrifice on the cross, well, I don't really want it. I want to do things my own way. And by doing things your own way, you are rejecting Christ. You're not submitting to his death, burial, and resurrection and obeying the gospel. And because you have not given yourself to Jesus and trusted Jesus, you cannot be in the phileo level, the friendship level with God. God still loves you, no doubt, in the agape love. And God will keep looking after you and send sunshine and rain on you your whole life. But right now, all you have is agape love. But agape love cannot save you. You need to come into phileo love. It's the right thing to do. Now, I've had people say to me, I don't know whether I should get baptized or not. Of course you should. It's the right thing to do, whether you feel like doing it or not. Why is it the right thing to do? Because God commands it. Just do it. Just do the right thing and come to Jesus today. God bless you. Thank you very much.